Hello and welcome back. Today we will be reading White Lies, How the South Lost the Civil War, then Rewrote the History by Ann Bausum. Introduction. I know a thing or two about white lies, having been raised on them in the 1960s during my childhood in Virginia. Of course, no one called them lies then. They called them history. My school books presented the lies as truth, so I believed them. Millions of other school children did too. Many of us lived in the South, but students elsewhere were exposed to them as well. That's because the lies had been repeated so long and so loudly that they drowned out the facts. Lies about the nature of slavery, lies about the cause of the Civil War, lies about the war's soldiers and leaders and battles, lies about Reconstruction, the period of reunification that followed the war, lies about race, segregation, and equality, lies that were deliberately woven into a cult of misinformation known as the lost cause. Enough lies to fill a book. Many of these lies were so old by the time I got to school that they had outlived the people who started them. Lies do that. They pass like brush fire from one set of lips to the next, from one source to the next, from one generation to the next, until they become accepted as the truth. Many of the lies began as convenient ways for someone to excuse their participation in the enslavement of other people or to prevent criticism of a relative who had fought on the rebellious side of a war. But falsehoods tend to multiply, lie upon lie, and when they do, the facts get lost. That's a problem, because when the facts get lost, history gets lost. And a nation that loses its history is a nation that has lost its ability to thrive. Its citizens lack the experience, wisdom, and unity to acknowledge their country's collective mistakes and to learn from them together. Instead of growing stronger, they remain diminished, stuck on repeat, stuck with lies. There is an old saying that history is written by the victors, for that is often what happens. The Civil War was different for any number of reasons, including racism, the forward-looking hopes of Northern whites, and the backward-looking regrets of Southern whites who tirelessly refused to admit wrongdoing. The perspective of former Confederates prevailed. This book seeks to reclaim the nation's history by exposing the lies that emerged in the South before, during, and after the Civil War. Part 1 shows how the soil that would nurture the lies was prepared. Part 2 traces how the lies were planted. Part 3 demonstrates how the lies overtook the country and corrupted our national understanding of the past, including in my childhood classrooms. Part 4 explores attempts to nourish or discourage our connection to historical accuracy, including those that continue to this day. Lies have multiple purposes, and one of them is to create power. The people who have benefited from past lies will be the first to criticize efforts that undercut them. Not surprisingly, they will lie to do it. That's the problem with lies. Once they start telling them, it's hard to stop. Threaten liars with the facts and they will reflexively double down with more falsehoods. It's not surprising today during an era where issues of race, class, and privilege are such a focus of national debate that the matter of truth is too. Lies swirl around us, corrupting our understanding of current events in the same way that they have distorted our appreciation of the past. Until we break this cycle, until accuracy replaces misinformation, we will struggle. As long as the people in power can use lies to sow division, we will be held back. But when we reject the lies and embrace the facts of our national story, both its moments of shame and those of majesty, we create the potential to flourish. This book is my attempt once and for all, to lance my own childhood wounds and to offer a better pathway forward for us all. Its history spans much of our nation's existence. Its revelations can be infuriating, embarrassing, and liberating. That's what it feels like to confront lies. Those who choose to share this journey will gain a world-changing richness of understanding. Will you join me? Notes about language. A whole new kind of lost cause and other verbal traps lurking in American history. Readers of this book will likely learn a new meaning for a familiar term, the lost cause. During the decades before and after the Civil War, a series of lies caught hold in the United States and became known as the lost cause. Collectively, these falsehoods represent the tenets or beliefs of a defeated rebel nation, the Confederate States of America. The phrase lost cause captured the wistful regret many wealthy Southern whites felt after their failed attempt to establish an independent nation with a slavery-based economy that could sustain their privileged lifestyles. These Southerners found it advantageous to mislead themselves and others about such matters as race, the institution of slavery, the war, the Reconstruction. Their lies were repeated so persistently that they began to take the place of facts, not just in the South, but throughout the country. Many of these lies still distort our understanding of the past. Many believe them today without ever hearing of the lost cause, but it's important to appreciate them today without ever a deliberate pattern of misinformation. 20 lies of the lost cause are highlighted in the sidebars that accompany each chapter of this book. The same history is also woven throughout the main text, but calling these falsehoods out individually, I hope to help readers more readily identify them for what they are, the lies of the lost cause. The political parties throughout what? Terms like Republican and Democrat are also likely to take on an unexpected meaning during the reading of this book. Today we recognize Republicans as more conservative than their Democratic counterparts, who generally support more progressive positions on racial justice, ethnicity, gender rights, social welfare, and governmental policies. Today's Republicans hold considerable power in the South, the Great Plains, the Northern Rockies, and rural settings, while Democrats are concentrated in cities in many of the nation's coastal states and in the Northeast. At the time of the Civil War, however, these circumstances of geography and political opinion were reversed. Abraham Lincoln and the newly formed Republican Party held more progressive views than Democrats, particularly those concentrated in the South. This alignment lasted for many decades. During the challenges of the Great Depression and World War II, the ideological positions or beliefs of these two parties became more fluid. And by the end of the 1960s, they had almost entirely flipped. Race and racism influenced these shifts, including the most recent one. During the 1960s, President Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat, broke with conservatives in this party and pushed Congress to pass a series of civil rights laws and weakened the South's restrictive racial policies known as Jim Crow. Many Southern whites abandoned the Democratic Party in protest and became Republicans. Many blacks, having regained their voting rights thanks to Johnson's administration, opted to set aside their long-standing allegiance to the party of Lincoln and support Democrats instead. During subsequent decades, the Republican Party fully cemented its place at the right wing of American politics, and Democrats positioned themselves to their left and center, completely opposite from where they had stood a century and a half ago. I further explore the evolution of the political party alignments in the main text but readers will benefit from being mindful of this history in advance. It's also good to be reminded that political power remains a force in motion, and further shifts many follow for their party's beliefs and the profiles of their supporters. The terminology of race. Many words have been used to name the African American people who were brought against their will to the early settlements of this country during the beginning of 1619. The same has been true for the generations of their descendants. Some terms have carried a greater degree of respect than others, but they marked those who bore them as inferior to whites. Those words, including Negro, frequently appear in historical quotations from the nation's past. At first, the term Negro was not capitalized. In the 20th century, after people like W.E.B. Du Bois pushed for change, it was granted the added respect of capitalization. Some of the quotations I've shared predated that switch, and like all the quotations in this book, they appear as written or published originally, talking about slavery. Language has evolved in other ways too. Terms such as slave and master and runaway were popularized by the people who held others in bondage. Those who bore the terms were powerless to change them, and the labels endured even after slavery was abolished. In recent years, these designations have been reconfigured to reflect the points of view of oppressed people. Updated terms include enslaved and enslaver and freedom seekers. Words like owner are also being set aside because it can seem presumptuous to suggest that an enslaver's physical domination could extend to someone's human spirit and thought. I have chosen to adopt these practices, and I encourage others to do the same. Such words provide agency for exploited people and diminish the power of their oppressors. Likewise, I have replaced the outdated term slave trader with trafficker. Finally, I do not use the word plantation when describing southern farms. This term is nostalgic euphemism for places of forced labor. Its continued use helps to mask the horror of these work sites. Matters of race and place. Because we live in a society where inequality can still be measured by race, it is helpful when we look back in time to see how race and racism were intertwined in the past. I have chosen to acknowledge that reality by referring to people originating from African nations as Black and those coming from European nations as white. My publisher and I have elected to capitalize both words. When it is not capitalized, the word white can appear to be the default setting on a race, as if it is the norm by which all other races are measured. Capitalizing white helps to elevate the word's visibility in ways that make us think about the role of racial distinctions in our history. For the same reason, I differentiate between people who share the same geography, but those are not the same viewpoint. The words Southerner can mean very different things depending on one's race. For clarity, I use more specific language, such as Southern whites or Southern blacks. Even there, of course, one can find multiple perspectives, but my goal is to point out a broader racial viewpoint. No disrespect is intended to blacks or whites as a group of individually when these racially based descriptions appear without accompanying nouns, as I've done in this sentence. In all cases, I acknowledge the humanity behind the terms, and I encourage the reader to share that vision. Finally, I should offer some background on my language choices for events most frequently known as the Civil War. Just as with history of slavery, there are words and terms for this subject that deserve reconsideration rather than present this conflict as one between equally opposed Union and Confederate sides. For example, I identified the troops that remain loyal to the federal government of the United States as America as federal soldiers and U.S. soldiers. These men wore U.S. military uniforms while defending the U.S. Constitution and should be recognized as representatives of the U.S. government, not just as a Union side. They fought against others who had renounced their U.S. citizenship to establish a rebel country, the Confederate States of America. Therefore, the designation Confederates remains appropriate. As you will learn from this book, terms like Union, Confederate, and even Civil War can be used to manipulate our understanding of this history. I will use several terms, including Civil War, to refer to the battles Americans fought between 1861 and 1865. But for me, the conflict now seems best represented by its original name, the one that was given by the U.S. government as it unfolded, the War of the Rebellion. Part 1. A Foundation for Lies, what wealthy whites said to maintain slavery, launch a rebellion, and survive defeat. Monuments to the lost cause will prove monuments of folly, both in the memories of a wicked rebellion, which they must necessarily perpetuate, and in the failure to accomplish the particular purpose had in view by those who build them. It is needless record of stupidity and wrong. Frederick Douglass, 1870. And then we have some pictures here. Lie 1. Slavery was a compassionate institution. Each falsehood of the lost cause sought to sway public opinion. The history of slavery in America was one of the most popular subject for distortion. White Southerners were eager to convince others and themselves that they were taking part in a mutually beneficial arrangement. If they succeeded, they could avoid facing blame or guilt for their participation. The lies persisted even after slavery ended in 1865. Contrary to all evidence, including the traumatic memories that haunted the formerly enslaved and the lash marks that scarred so many of their bodies, proponents of this false narrative claimed that slavery had been conducted in a humane and thoughtful way. Enslavers had treated the enslaved like members of their families, said the promoters of this falsehood. They had fed, clothed, and cared for them during their sickness and old age. Violent treatment had been the exception, not the rule. Southern enslavers had already convinced themselves long before the Civil War that these beliefs were grounded in reality. After the Civil War and slavery's demise, they worked to convince others of these same misrepresentations of the facts. Jefferson Davis, a former enslaver who had served as president of the Confederate States of America, declared after the war that never was there happier dependence between two groups of people than during slavery. He and others claim credit for promoting not only the material needs of the people they held in bondage, but the spiritual ones as well, by introducing them to Christianity. As he put it, their enslaved workers had been enlightened by the rays of Christianity. Many whites tried to obscure their past ties to slavery by substituting the word servant for slave when describing their formerly enslaved workers. Such portrayals erase the fact of the misery enslaved people experienced, the forced separation of black families, the routine sexual exploitation of enslaved women, the oppression that forbade people to learn how to read, the financial wins and gains whites reaped with the system. All were omitted and ignored. Instead, the public was charmed into believing a version of events that left whites blameless for their ties to slavery and misled blacks into believing that their enslaved ancestors had been happy. Only in recent decades, after scholars and the descendants of the enslaved begun to unwind this web of deceit by uncovering eyewitness accounts and other evidence in the historical record of the cruelty and true horror of enslavement in America, they have brought forth facts with the potential to erase the lies. We're going to stop there and pick up chapter 1.